a great time. What if I told you that 3 months from now, 4 billion people, a majority of the human species, are going to be locked in their homes under voluntary house arrest? You'd tell me I was nuts, right? Except that is exactly what happened in 2020. COVID blew across the planet, leaving a wake of destruction in its path, and none of us saw it coming. Well, not none of us. A few people actually did. I want to tell you about a friend of mine. His name is Brian Schultz. And Brian founded Studio Movie Grill. Studio Movie Grill is a movie theater chain that they actually pioneered the idea of serving you like a nice restaurant meal while you're watching a movie. It's a format that many people have copied since he founded that over 20 years ago. And just like the rest of us, Brian heard in the beginning of 2020 that there was a weird disease coming out of China. Now, most of us just shrugged and kind of went about our days, but not Brian. Brian looked at this and said, I wonder if this is something that I need to pay attention to. So he started making some calls. And he knew exactly who to call. You see, because before Brian started a movie theater chain, he had actually been a foreign policy aide on Capitol Hill, and he had friends who were in the intelligence community and who worked at Washington think tanks, so he knew exactly who to call. And so when he talked to them, they said this. They said that, number one, this thing was deadly. And number two, this thing was traveling like wildfire. And number three, don't believe all of what you're hearing in the news. This thing was probably already inside the United States. And so he knew he needed to get some people together and do something because this would be bad for his theaters. Now, it's one thing to actually hear the signals of what's happening. It's another thing to actually believe it. And it's a third thing to know what to do about it, but Brian knew what he needed to do. He got his leadership team together, and the first thing he told them was, don't pay any of next month's rent checks to our landlords, because we need to hold on to that money. And the second thing he decided was that they actually had a $20 million line of credit, and he told his chief financial officer, he said, draw down that whole thing, because we're going to need that money if things get bad. And then the third thing that he knew was that Studio Movie Grill actually owed a lot of money to a big bank called Goldman Sachs. And he knew that if things got really bad, the first thing that Goldman would do would be to claw back that $20 million. So Brian told his CFO, take that $20 million and divide it up into a bunch of little bank accounts and spread it out across multiple banks, because at least it'll slow them down. March 13th came, and all of the United States went into lockdown, and every office and every restaurant and certainly every movie theater chain was shut down. And so Brian went into the COVID quarantine with no revenue, and $20 million in the bank, and 7,200 employees to take care of. Except he didn't actually have 20 million. You see, because what happened was that when he told his CFO to take all of that money and divide it up and put it in those different bank accounts, his CFO thought he was crazy. He said, this is never going to happen, and if we get locked down, it'll only be for like a couple of weeks or something like that. And even if that happened, what are the odds that Goldman Sachs is going to pull back all that money? They're never going to do that, right? But that's exactly what happened. So Brian went into COVID with 7,200 people and their families' mouths to feed and no revenue, and not 20 million, but only 2 million in the bank. Yeah. The next few months were hell. I mean, it was bad for all of us, friends. But for him, just to try and hold that company together, it was awful. And by September, Studio Movie Grill had to declare Chapter 11. They had to go bankrupt. And the first thing that Goldman Sachs did as their creditor is they took over the company, and they told Brian to fire everybody. And he thought this was incredibly harsh. This was incredibly brutal. Most of these people were minimum wage workers, and they had no cushion. And they said, that doesn't matter, get rid of all of them. So Brian did something that he's still astounded with nowadays, which is that he took $8 million of his own personal money and he gave it out as 1 month severance to every single one of his employees. He knew that there was a difference in values between himself and the bank. But more importantly, he also knew that this was just going to be temporary. At some point, the movies were going to come back. But he also knew that as the founder of the company, he had never signed a non-compete. So he put in his resignation, and he quit the company that he founded, and he went out and he started fresh all over again. He started with one theater in Amarillo, Texas, called Look Cinema, and he started completely from scratch. It's now been several years since COVID, and people are back out, and we're out in schools, and we're out in offices, and we're out in restaurants. And yes, we've actually gone back into theaters to watch movies like Wicked and Fantastic Four and every cool new movie that is coming out. And you could be excused if you look back and you think that maybe you thought we'd never be watching movies ever again. But not Brian. You see, he knew that that was just a moment in time. He couldn't predict exactly what was going to happen, but he knew that things would change. He's always thinking about what's going to change. And now he's growing his movie theater chain. Now, the people at Goldman Sachs were not bad folks, and they were certainly not stupid. Goldman Sachs is filled with very smart people. The problem is that they're incredibly present-focused. They're focused on the here and now. And so when Brian left, the first thing they did was they looked at all of their theaters and they said, these things are all losing a bunch of money. We should start selling them off. And in fact, the theaters that were losing the most money were the newest theaters, were the nicest theaters, because they hadn't paid off any of their investment yet. So one by one, Goldman had been selling off all of the theaters that they had, the nicest ones, and one by one, Brian bought them back. He's now growing it, and look, is a thriving business. In fact, he's still thinking about the future and where it goes from here. He's put in digital menus so that he can customize what you eat depending on who the crowd is coming in to watch the movie that night. And he's decided there's got to be better ways to get people food, so he's actually experimenting with robots that deliver you the food, right? He's a fascinating human being. I love working with folks like Brian Schultz. It's not just because he genuinely cares about people. It's not just because he's an incredibly ethical person. But more than that, Brian is truly future-focused. He's constantly thinking about what's going to happen in the world, not just what's happening today. It doesn't mean that he predicts the future. It doesn't mean that he's living way out saying, like, we're going to all have virtual reality 20 years from now. It just means that his outlook on life is fundamentally grounded in what's going to be, not what's happening today. This is so important, friends. It's so important for all of us to be constantly focused on the future because the world is changing. You all know this. We're seeing this every single day. I don't have to show you a bunch of headlines, but I will. I mean, take a look at this. There's all sorts of things that are happening out there. The number of wildfires that we're seeing, the number of hurricanes that we're seeing, the kind of new companies that are coming online, the kind of new behaviors that we're seeing. There's all sorts of different titles and things that I could show you. If you're a food company and suddenly someone invented Ozempic, this is a huge problem. And if you're Ford or GM and somebody invented Tesla, this is a huge problem. I love this headline right up top. Esports gamers get the same visa as other athletes. Think about that. If you play video games, do you guys consider that a sport? Well, here's the thing. It doesn't matter what you think because the State Department says that you qualify as an athlete. Yeah, the world is changing. Right? And so why is that important? The reason that matters is because companies that don't respond to that change, companies that aren't future-focused, get fracked. Now, this word fracking, you all may be familiar with this. This is the concept of hydraulic fracturing. We have invented a new way to find oil underground, right, where you can break shale rock and you can bring with chemicals, you can pull out oil out of the ground. Right? It's what's actually made the United States a net oil producer, for the globe in a way that we hadn't been in a couple of generations. But I think it's also an interesting metaphor for how people are living their lives and what's happening to companies. I mean, imagine this. Imagine that you're a farmer, living in Pennsylvania or Ohio or somewhere like that, and you're a really good farmer. You've lived on that farm for 3 generations, and you're really good at farming. But unbeknownst to you, down the road, there's an energy company that is breaking shale rock 50,000 feet underground, and it's leaching up all sorts of chemicals and methane gas, and all of that stuff is getting into your water table, and you get up one day and you turn on your faucet, and your water lights on fire, and you have to move. You have been fracked, right? And that idea that like your basic way of life has been broken by factors that are beyond your control, right? Something that you may not have been paying attention to is something that we're seeing more and more. My colleagues and I, where I work at Jump, have been spending a lot of time looking at companies that are fracked a little bit, companies that are fracked a lot. We've started to put together our own list of what we call the fracked list. Would you like to see what that looks like? Here's our fracked list, right? And it's just as some of the most well-known companies in this list. On the left-hand side, the first thing you can see are companies that are totally fracked. I mean companies that are fracked and dead or dying. Companies like Circuit City or Blockbuster, right? Or Kodak. And then there's other companies that they're not dead yet, but they're in a world of hurt right now. Places like JCPenney or Hertz are seriously in trouble. Bed Bath & Beyond. And then the next column, these are companies that are actually getting fracked today, where forces beyond their control are just disrupting their business model. These are places like Citibank and Coca-Cola and Dell and General Electric, right? You know, the cereal companies are on that list too, because we're just not eating cereal like we used to. Cereal consumption in the United States is declining 4% a year. To give you some sense of scale, cigarette consumption is only declining 3% a year. So these companies are totally getting fracked. And then there's companies who are actually fighting fracking. People who are taking their destiny in their own hands to try and do something about it. People like BMW and Disney and Microsoft who are actually saying, look, the world is changing. We need to get going on it. They're actually making changes to their business model. Right? Disney is doing this. Disney realized that they needed to get into streaming. We're just not going only to theaters or only going to watch, their stuff on cable TV. I love that the New York Times is on our list of companies that are fighting fracking too. I mean, the New York Times is like 150 years old. We used to call it the gray lady because it didn't have color photos in it. And now their app is like one of the most downloaded apps on the internet, right? They make a lot of their money from playing games like crossword and Wordle. Anyone play Wordle in the audience? The folks who are addicted to that? That's the New York Times. They are doing something to renew themselves and to fight fracking. And then we've got the list over here of companies that we call the frackers, right? People like Amazon and Google and Netflix and OpenAI. These are people who are causing the disruption in the world, right? Who are making life, difficult for everybody else. They're the serious frackers. We also have a list of smaller ones. You can see a sample of them here. Folks like Robinhood and Cureleaf. We call these the little frackers. And they're the little frackers because it's easy to discount them and not pay attention to them and say they're so small, but you should pay attention to the little frackers because if you don't, eventually they grow up to being big frackers, and if you weren't watching that, then you're truly fracked. So what do you do about this? Well, how do you fight this? How do you fight this kind of fracking? Well, the most important thing that you have to do is pay attention to those large changes that are happening in society. And by large changes, I just don't mean about which company matters, right? Or which company is getting fracked. There's an even more important scoreboard that I want to show to you. It's this one right here. This scoreboard is the one that keeps me up at night, friends. This goes beyond whether one company is doing better than the other. This is our countdown. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is our countdown of some of the biggest changes that we see, not just happening in business, but happening in the world today. Everybody say 8. 8. What's 8 on this list? Anyone? 8 billion people. That's right. That's how many people we have on planet Earth. And the way we keep 8 billion people on planet Earth is we give all the good stuff to 1 billion people and we tell everybody else to go pound sand. Everybody say 7. 7. There's 7 countries in the world that have gender parity in their parliaments or their congresses. 7 countries that have about as many representatives who are men as they have who are women. 277 countries on planet Earth, and only 7 of them have gender parity. I wonder if that's why we have the crazy distorted policies that we have in the United States. Everybody say 6. 6. What's 6? 1/6 of people in the United States face food insecurity. 1 in 6 people in the United States are in danger of going to bed hungry every night. Not in Somalia, not in Sudan, but in the United States of freaking America. Half of those people are children. Everybody say 5? What's 5? 5,000 out of every million people in the United States are incarcerated. We keep a larger percentage of our people in jail than any country in the history of mankind. We keep a larger percentage of people in jail than the Soviet Union did under Stalin. And we do it through mandatory 3 strikes laws and actually being predatory to blacks and Latinos. So we take kids straight out of junior high school and shove them right into the penal system. Everybody say 4. 40% of Americans think that it is likely that we will have a civil war between each of us in the next 10 years. That's something you got to pay attention to, because if we can't hold together, how are we going to solve these problems? Everybody say 3.
3.
What's 3? 3? It's a ratio, 3 to 1. 3 to 1 is the ratio of suicides to homicides on planet Earth. 3 times as many people commit suicide as homicides. By homicides, I don't just mean all the people who got shot in Chicago yesterday. Take all the people who died in war as well. So take everybody who died in Ukraine. Take everybody who got shot in Yemen. Take everybody who are dying in Congo yesterday. And 3 times as many human beings decided to go gently into the night. What does that tell you? It means that we have a challenge not just with safety and security, but we have a challenge with meaning and joy. Everybody say 2. Come on, you all know what this is, right? Come on, yell it out. Yeah, 2 degrees. What is the 2 degrees? Climate change. 2 degrees is the amount that scientists tell us that if we pass this number in terms of 2 degrees for the planet heating, there is very little chance of us going back. We can't actually fix that. And everybody say 1. What's 1? What's 1? One world. What else is 1? One. 1 is, for most of you in this room, the number of lives that you're going to lead, the number of chances that you're going to get. Not me, baby. I'm Indian. My parents are Hindu. We believe in reincarnation. I'm coming back, bitches. But for the rest of you all, this is your one shot. This is your one chance to make it great, to do something about everything that you've seen on this list and everything that I showed you on that fractal list before. And so the real question is, so what are you going to do about it? And how do you stay ahead of it? And how do you not just get ground down in whatever is happening right today? Well, the answer is that we all, as leaders, need to be future focused, like my friend Brian Schultz. We need to be thinking not just what's going on right now, but what's going to happen and where we're going to be from here. But I got to tell you, that is hard. It's difficult to be truly future-focused, to actually think about the world like that on a regular basis. There's people who've done research around this. I moonlight as a professor at Stanford University, and folks at the psychology department have done research on this there. And what they've found is a little disappointing, which is they say most of us are not future-focused. This is a bell curve that they show that 16% of human beings are truly future-focused. That means 16% of this room are people who are constantly thinking about where the world is going to be in 5 years, in 10 years. There's another 14% of people who are past-focused. These are folks who, they're the ones who say, taxi cabs will never go away. Uber is just a blip. We don't need to think about how the world is changing. You know what? You can forget those people. You can, disprove them. Time will catch up to the past-focused people. But it's the people in the middle of that bell curve. 70% of us are present-focused. 70% of us think about the here and now, and we cannot imagine what the world is going to be like in the future. And when you show them slides like what I just showed you and data like what I just showed you, and when you say that the world is changing, they say, you know what? You're right. The world is changing, but we need to focus on this quarter. And that's the worst of all 3 possible combinations, right? Because at least with the future-focused people, they're going. The present-focused people, they agree with you that the world is changing, and they're driving over the cliff anyway. And it's a death sentence for the rest of us. But here's the good news. You don't have to be stuck like that. You don't have to, if you were like many of us, 70% of us, 70% of this room, that are truly present focused, you can actually change. I've been spending a lot of time looking at what are the habits of future-focused leaders. I spend my days as an advisor to CEOs. I spend a lot of time with some of the most future-focused leaders in the world. And so I've had a chance to discover what are the habits and practices that make for really great leaders who can think about the future, folks like Brian Schultz. And I have to tell you, they are very different from the rest of us. There's a whole bunch of habits that they have that are really different. I'm not going to go through all of them now, but I will say that they're very good at balancing the now and the next. They're not just a futurist. They're not just thinking about where the world is going to be. They also care about leading from where we are today to get us to where we're going to be in the future. They're so great at balancing the now and the next. They're really good at envisioning the upside of what's possible, but then they'll pitch the downside. They'll say, ooh, here's where we can go, and then they'll tell everybody else, hey, we really need to go there, because if we don't go there, we're screwed, right? And they're really great at valuing insight over risk-taking, right? Some of the future-focused leaders that you'll see in the world, you'll look at them and you'll say, wow, that person just took an amazing big risk. But I have to tell you, the folks that I've spent time with, CEOs at Starbucks and Virgin and Nike, when you look at these people, they'll say, you know, everybody else thought it was a big risk, but Dave, if you saw what I saw, it was freaking obvious, right? So what they really value is insight more than anything else. But that still doesn't answer what the rest of us, the other, many of us who are in the 70% can do about this. Well, here's the good news. You can actually rewire your brain. You can actually change how you think about the world. Neuroplasticity is a beautiful thing. And you can rewire how you think, how you act, and how you lead. Now, to do that, you shouldn't just sit there and think about it. What you need to do is actually start behaving in a different way. Because what all of the research suggests is that it is far easier to act yourself into a new way of thinking than to think yourself into a new way of acting. I'll say that again because it's so important. It is far easier to act yourself into a new way of thinking than to think yourself into a new way of acting. And so all you have to do is start acting differently. And act differently both for yourself and for your team, and for your company. Now, there's a lot of different things that we can do, but I just want to share a couple of different, kind of tips and tricks, stuff that you can actually get started with. And I'll share it really at the level of 3 different areas that we care about in business, which is strategy and culture and leadership. And leadership meaning yourself, right? You got to change yourself too. It's amazing. Friends, I got to tell you, the number of times that you can meet a CEO or a senior vice president inside of a company and they'll say, the world is changing, yeah, and our industry needs to change, and so our company needs to change, and therefore our management team needs to change. Me, I'm good. That can't possibly be the case. So what are little things that you can do to change your strategy for your company, to change your culture for your team, and to change how you lead for yourself? I'll give you a couple of examples, just things that you could start. At the level of a company, when you think about strategy, the biggest advice that we have for you is don't try to predict the future. Every present-focused person tries to do this. They try to say, okay, here's exactly what's going to happen in 5 years or in 7 years, and they try to bet the farm, and they make big bets. Don't do that. What is far more useful is to imagine multiple things that might happen in the future and figure out how you would survive, how you would thrive, no matter which of these futures came to pass. This was a practice that was developed originally at Royal Dutch Shell, the big oil company back in the 60s. They actually tried to imagine where they would be in the future. And at the time, Royal Dutch Shell was kind of an also-ran. They were not nearly as big as Exxon and British Petroleum and other folks. But they started to think about the future in a very different way. They started to ask questions about unlikely possibilities that would have outsized consequences. For instance, as an oil company, they said, what if, like all these Arab countries that we've been screwing over for decades, what if they all got together and unionized on us? And they were like, that is never going to happen. Yeah, but what if it did? What if they all did that? Well, that would be really horrible. We'd be really screwed. Well, what would we wish we had done if that were to occur? They said, well, we really wish that we had explored oil in other places around the world, such as offshore oil drilling in the North Sea. And so they made investments in that ahead of anyone else. And so in 1973, when the OPEC oil embargo happened and Middle Eastern countries flexed their muscles. Royal Dutch Shell were the only folks who actually had a plan in place to do something about it, and they leaped to the head of the pack. So the takeaway for all of us is that when you're thinking about your company, when you're thinking about your strategy, don't try to predict the future. Imagine possible futures of what might happen and figure out how you would survive no matter which of those futures came to pass. I'll give you another thing that you can do at the level of your team. Because keep in mind, if 70% of the world is present-focused, that means 70% of your team is probably present-focused as well. It's very hard for folks to imagine futures if we're spending time in the present. But we can go visit the future, and that's actually the thing that you need to do. There's a beautiful saying by William Gibson. He said that the future exists today, it's just unevenly distributed. And so go out and find places in the world where weird stuff is going on today, which might be a signal of how we might all behave in the future. I'll give you an example. We were doing some work with a very large financial services company, a top 5 bank in the United States. And one of the things we were pointing out to them was you need to be prepared because it seems likely that cash, like dollar bills and coins, are going away. We're just not going to have them in 10 years. And that seems such a brain breaker for them. They're like, that's not going to happen. So what did we do? We found places in the world where those changes were already starting to happen. You get on a plane and you go to Shanghai, you go to China, and you walk around Shanghai, and what you'll find is it is a rapidly growing, very prosperous city, but Shanghai still has a fair number of homeless people. And if your heart goes out to those homeless people and you want to give them a little bit of money and you offer to give them money, they're happy. They pull out their phone because they want to use Alipay to make the transfer because it turns out that homeless people in Shanghai don't take cash. So there's stuff going on in the world. Go visit those places and see what's going on and do it as a habit and a practice. And you don't have to go to the other end of the globe to see this. There's interesting stuff going on in your own hometown. Just go to the other end of town. Just go hang out with people who aren't the people you normally hang out with and notice what's happening and think about how might this be a distant early warning of what's about to happen for the rest of us. So we talked about the level of strategy for a company, and we've talked a little bit about culture for your team. There's one last person that we need to focus on, and that's you, right? And what you should be doing to kind of like change your own thinking, to rewire your brain so that you could be more future-focused. And one of the suggestions that I make to folks is to try a time diet. I mean, what's a time diet? It's like a regular diet. You know, if you've ever tried to work out and get in shape, right? Or, you just want to look a little better. I had this, my personal trainer said, well, start keeping a log of everything you're eating all day. And you'll start to notice, like, wow, I'm eating a lot of junk, right? And you might even start to change your behaviors based on that. Well, you can do the same thing with how your brain is thinking about the world. That's called a time diet, where you just take your calendar, maybe you have a Google Calendar or you have something in Microsoft Outlook, take your calendar, and every day at the end of the day, just take a couple of minutes and look at your calendar and think about every conversation you had. And if that conversation was really thinking about the future, and future I mean not today or this year, but like beyond the next 3 years, go ahead and mark that, that slot orange. And if that conversation was really about the present, well then, mark it green. And if that conversation that you had, that meeting you had was really all about the past, mark it blue. And just notice what are the kind of conversations you're having over time. And after 2 weeks, take a look at it. And don't feel bad if you have all past and present focused stuff. That's like most of us. Remember what I said, 70% of us are present focused. But think about what you could be doing differently to make time to think about the future that is going to be coming at all of us. Larry Page, one of the co-founders of Google, talks about this. He talks about how when he was the CEO of Google, he would spend the afternoon, every Friday afternoon with one of their mobile acquisitions. Now, look, Google makes all of their money from ad-paid search revenue. And he said, I felt so guilty. We had this little operating system that we had bought called Android, and I spent every Friday afternoon with them. It just seemed so cool, but I knew it was kind of a waste of time compared to the ad revenue. I'm so glad we did that because that's actually part of the future of the company. So the biggest takeaway I have from that is if you don't feel guilty about how much time you're spending thinking about the future, you're probably not doing it enough. Right? Now, it doesn't mean you have to blow up your entire calendar. You just have to change what you're doing in the meetings that you already have. For instance, if you're actually sitting down with one of your employees and you're talking about, their performance, there's a very past-focused way to do that. To say, well, here's what you did last year, and this isn't good, and this was better, right? And you could spend time right now talking about, okay, what's our plan now, and make it very present-focused. Or you could turn that into a future-focused conversation and say, like, hey, Marco, where do you want to be in 5 years? And how do I help get you there? Right? And it's a much more empowering conversation than talking about the past or staying mired in the present. So just little habits like that can rewire your brain. Remember, neuroplasticity is a beautiful thing, and it is far easier to act yourself into a new way of thinking than to think yourself into a new way of acting. So that's how you bring together strategy, how you bring together culture, how you bring together leadership so that you could actually change your organization, your teams, and yourself to be more future-focused. And it's so important that we do this, friends. I have to tell you, my colleagues and I at Jump, we actually hold a conference every year. It's called the Jump Offsite, and we bring together leaders of strategy and innovation from all the biggest companies in the world. They all come together in Napa, and we learn so much from those conversations. And I always learn really big things because we bring in experts on things like climate change and population and energy just to see what's happening. And here's what I've learned from the last few offsites that we've had. It's this. It's that the next 10 years are going to have an outsized impact on the happiness of the human condition for the next 1,000 years. And even as I say that, I kind of threw up a little in my mouth because it seems kind of grandiose, doesn't it? But friends, it's true. The data is there. Civilizations don't just go on forever coasting. Sometimes we go through periods where there's a lot of change and then it moves into a new cycle of prosperity, or there's a lot of change and it just, falls away. And a few hundred years later, you look back and say, what happened? How did we fall so far? Friends, from all the data that I've seen, I've come to believe we are in one of those periods right now. And the choices that we all make with our companies, with our teams, with our families will influence that decision. Choose wisely. And so that brings me back to that first question that I started with, which is what if? What if the stuff that you're working on today, what if the decisions that you're making today, what if the work that you're doing today is actually just a warm-up, is just practice, is calisthenics for you to get ready for the thing that you were really put on planet Earth to do? How would you do things differently? What changes would you make? The choices we make matter, friends. Choose wisely. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Thanks.